Just thoughts a little bit here. Let's have some fun. Let's read. The assistant commissioner. Okay, so we just got done reading from Inspector General of the staff of General Howard declaring earlier in 1866 that Texas was in the worst condition of any state that he had visited, and almost the whole population was hostile in feeling and actions of the United States to the United States. There were that there was a mere semblance of government, and that the white and black people were everywhere ignorant, lawless, and starving. So that's his thing, and that's disgusting. All right, the assistant commissioner for Texas under the Freedmen's Bureau arrived in Texas September 1865 and began to appoint local agents in December. He found the freemen, quote, not only willing but anxious to improve every opportunity offered for their moral and intellectual advancements. So like tells you that black people are ready to go. In January 1866, one Black Belt county reports, quote, that 2/3 of the freed population were then at work at good wages, and that 7,000 contracts had been filed already, and that employed freemen were becoming scarce. By the end of January, there were 26 days and nights, schools, and 1,600 black pupils enrolled. There was the usual bitter attack upon presence of black troops late in 1865 and earlier in 1866. After much delay, an election was held January 8th, 1866, and a convention was scheduled to meet in August and February. There were strong differences of opinion among the delegates. Dalrymple said, "My opponents, each and all, concede something to black people, some more, some less, approximating to equality with the white race. I concede them nothing but the station of hewers of wood and drawers of water." End quote. If a Republican form of government is to be sustained, the white race must do it without any black alloy. And a quote, I'm not using that word. They use Mongrel. Mexico affords no fit example for intimidation. Emanate. Ooh, let me look at this word. First word in, not the first word in. One of the words in. Is it imitation? I think it's imitation. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Imitation.
Yeah, imitation. I desired the perpetuation of a white man's government. So he wants a white man's government. Great. Colonel M.T. Johnson of Tarrant County declared his opposition to granting black people any political rights whatever, and insisted that he should be made to work by uniform laws regulating pauperism, labor, and apprenticeship, but at the same time asserting the necessity of treating him with justice and kindness in his helpless conditions. There seems to have been only one candidate, E. Derringer, a prominent German of San Antonio, who openly advocated black suffrage. One proponent, Texas John H. Reagan, a prisoner of war at Fort Warren, Massachusetts, wrote a thoughtful letter in August, which was published in Texas in October. He pointed out that the South was in the position of a conquered nation, that Texas was not to be restored until it did what the North demanded, and that the North demanded protection against secession and abolition of slavery and civil rights for the free men. Moreover, it was probable that this alone would not satisfy the North, and that it would demand black suffrage. Reagan therefore advised that black testimony be omitted in court, and that an intelligence and possibly a property test be set for admission to the right to vote regardless of race or color, provided that no person previously entitled to vote should be deprived of the right by the new requirements. President Johnson secured a parole for Reagan, and it was hoped that he would have influence on the state. But his wise advance raised such opposition that he long refrained from further discussion. Quote, your refusal to accede to these conditions would be the result of a prolongation of the time during which you will be deprived of the civil government of your own choice and will continue subject to military rule. When the convention assembled, the former secessionists were in control. The governor, in his message, stressed the necessity of giving full civil rights to Black people and the possibility for political suffrage. He said, I do not believe that the great mass of the free men in our midst are qualified by their intelligence to exercise the right of suffrage. I do not desire to see this privilege conferred upon them. But if we fail to make political privileges depend upon rules and universal application, we will inevitably be betrayed into legislations under the influence of ancient prejudice and with a view only to the present. I think that human wisdom cannot discern what is to be the future of the African race. In this country, I would not be willing to deprive any man who is qualified under existing laws to vote of the exercise of that privilege in the future, but I believe it would be wise to regulate the qualifications of those who are to become voters hereafter by rules of universal application. Basically, more schools, more tests in order to vote. The convention dawdled and spent most of its time electioneering for the censorship and entered into a metaphysical discussion as to whether secession was illegal from the beginning or should simply be disavowed at present. Finally, the usual Southern, circumlocution. Oh wait, let me look up this word, everybody. Southern something, circumlocution. I can't say it. Look it up. That's why I have a second device. There it is. Circumlocution, which is the use of an unnecessary largely number of words to express an idea, essentially talking in circles or beating around the bush to avoid being direct. So let me hear it again. Circumlocution were adopted. African slavery had been terminated by the United States government, and therefore it should be discounted in Texas. Black people were to have property rights, but could testify only in cases involving Black people, although the legislator could, when it wished, give them full rights of testimony. The German Derringer, I think this is Derringer, was alone in his advocacy for black suffrage. There was some debate of repudiating the civil debt, which had been recklessly increased to nearly $8,500,000. After a session of 8 weeks, the convention adjourned, having failed to take any real advanced steps except the grudging recognition of emancipation. Immediately, preparations were made for the coming elections, and a considerable party wanted to drive out all Union men and nullify the emancipation of Black people. The planters supported the president of the convention as governor and opposed Black suffrage. Their ticket was elected by the large majority and eventually recognized by the president. Former Confederates elected as senators were unable to take the test oath. They and the representatives were refused seats in Congress. The 13th and 14th Amendment were presented to the legislature, the first without comment and the second without unqualified disapproval. The 14th Amendment was rejected by the vote of 70 to 5 in the House and a large majority in the Senate. Reagan again called attention to the trend of events that advocated qualified black suffrage and the right of black people to testify in the courts. His letter pronounced only irritation. The new head of the Freedmen's Bureau, General Kiddo, and it's spelled Kiddoo, favored the employers as against black laborers and established heavy fines for inciting laborers away from employers. A black code gave certain rights to freemen, not prohibited by the Constitution, but forbade intermarriage, voting, upholding public office, serving as jurors, or testifying in cases where black people were not concerned. Johnson urged that civil rights be extended to people of color if it had not already been done. Violence continued. In the spring and summer of 1866, the town of Brenham was burned. Soldiers broke up a black ball, and there was general lawlessness. Gangs of horses, thieves, and desperados were roaming about. Federal office officials reported that Union men and black people were fleeing for their lives, and that murders and outrages of black people were on the increase, while criminals were always acquitted. Kiddo substituted earlier yearly contracts instead of monthly contracts in the Cotton District and tried to assure the freemen of their wages. He repudiated the labor law passed by the legislature, but his successor adopted some of its provisions. March 19, 1867, Sheridan was made commander of the 5th Military District, consisting of Louisiana and Texas. Unable to secure the release of large numbers of black people imprisoned on trivial charges, Sheridan issued his jury order excluding from jurors persons who were unable to take the test oath. Sheridan declared that one trial of a white man for killing a black person was a farce. Meantime, the registration of voters under the new constitutional legislation began. Black people were eager to vote. A new state Republican Party was organized, and there was advocacy for free common schools and free homesteads from the public land, and all without discrimination of color. E.M. Peace was appointed governor by Sheridan July 30th, 1867, and Throckmorton removed. Pease was a native of Connecticut, but had been in Texas since 1835, and during 1853 to 1857 had been governor of the state. He opposed secessions. There arose among the Republicans a severe difference of opinion as to how far the former Confederates should be disenfranchised. The president in August removed Sheridan from command and substituted Thomas. 10 days later, he substituted Hancock for Thomas. Hancock assumed command in November. He was a Democrat and a follower of Johnson. He revised Sheridan's order concerning juries and declared that the country was, quote, in a state of profound peace. Peasy flatly contradicted this and said there had been 100 murders during the past year, with only 10 arrests and 5 trials. He declared that because of Hancock's order concerning juries, there have been an increase in crime and hostilities to the government. Agitation arose because it was said that black people were carrying arms, although it was well known that every white Texan was habitually armed, and black meetings, which was addressed by a Supreme Court judge, was broken up, and the judge complained. None but a Johnson man could be tolerated here. He must cuss Congress and damn the N-words. General Hancock is with the presidential political and will only executed the latter of the law to escape accountability. There is not an intelligent rebel in all the land who does not understand him. During 1867, there was bad feelings between the races. The whites especially resented arms in the hand of black soldiers, and the impossibility of convicting white aggressors upon black men was continually manifest. A judge declared that it was impossible to convict a white man of any crime on black testimony, where the crime was against a black person. To convict a white man of murder in the first degree was out of the question. Registration of vote that's ridiculous. Registration of voters had begun early in the summer of 1867, but went on slowly. The conservatives first proposed not to register, and then afterward changed their mind and registered with a plan of staying away from the election. The election was held in February 1868 and showed that comparatively few whites had been disenfranchised. 49,633 or 14% of white population registered in 1867, and 49,497 black people, or 27% of people of color population. A majority of the whites voted against the convention, but black people carried it. And total registration was 109,130, and the white registration was about equal to the total votes in the campaign in 1866. The election was quite a convention, won by an overwhelming vote of 44,689 to 11,440. In the Constitutional Convention, it was characteristic that among that 90 members, there were 12 reactionary white members from the Black Belt, elected undoubtedly by all too common methods. There were 9 black people and delegates from the Black District, bordering the Bronzo and Trinity rivers. J.T. Ruby came from Galveston. He was an educated black person, and was elected from the white districts of Galveston. Ruby was a biracial person from Philadelphia, and for 15 years was the leader of black people. He was rated as an astute politician, a man of unusual abilities. He was very popular in Galveston, where his brothers held a position of in the custom house. E.G. Davis was a new white leader of the Unionists. He had been an opponent of the secession and an officer in the Union Army during the war. He was one of the first to defend black suffrage. Governor Pease sent a message in which he declared that from December 1st, 1876 to June 1st, 1868, in 67 counties out of 127, 206 murders had taken place, with few attempts to punish the offenders. Of course not. We recommend schools and homesteads and the encouragement of immigration. Ralph Long of Limestone, a black person, was an outstanding leader. It was he who offered the resolution annulling certain court decisions, which declared that the Emancipation Proclamation should not take universal effect. His resolution was rejected by the two-thirds vote. On July 2nd, the Committee on Lawlessness and Violence reported 509 whites and 486 black people killed. 1865 to 1866, more than 90% of these murders were committed by white men. The report continues. In other words, according to the lowest calculation, the peace administration of General Hancock and Buchanan was to account for twice the number of murders committed under the Sheridan Throckmorton administration, and 3 times the number committed under the Sheridan Peace administration. Moreover, fuller reports show that since the policy of General Hancock was inaugurated, sustained as it is by President Johnson, the homicides in Texas have averaged 55 per month. And for the last 5 months, they have averaged 6 per month. It is for the commander of the 5th Military District to answer to the public for at least 2/3 of the 330 or more homicides committed in Texas since the first year of December 1867, charged by law to keep the peace and afford protection to life and property, having the Army of the United States to assist him in so doing, he was failed. He was presently refused to try criminals, reject the prayers of the executive of the state and of the commanding general of the District of Texas for adequate tribunals, and turned a deaf ear to the cry of trying to persecute loyalists, and knowing whereof we affirm, and in the face of the civilized world we do solemnly lay to his charge the death of hundreds of the loyal citizens of Texas, a responsibility that should load his name with infamy, and hand his very memory to coming years of a curse and excretion. Let me make sure. I'm gonna make sure that that's correct. Hold on a second. Hey everybody, welcome in. We're looking up a word real quick. There we go. Oh, of course it won't let me say it. Pronunciation. Ah, come on. I have to watch this YouTube video just to hear it.
It's a grand slam.
Execration.
Execration. Okay, sweet. Execration. All right. Delegates were sent to Congress.
Execration.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Delegates were sent to Congress with his report, while the Houston Telegraph advocated for their assassination. The convention in making the Constitution came to the question of suffrage in August, then postponed it until after recess, which took place after 92 days of work. The reason for the recess was difference among the Republicans and fear of mob law among the Democrats before the presidential election. Mob appears G.W. Smith, a white New Yorker and leader of black people, was jailed and lynched together with several of his black followers. Feuds were rife in many of the counties. Bands of Ku Klux roamed about. Black people were boycotted or given employment as they joined Democratic groups. In January, when the convention came together again, the question of suffrage was discussed. Democrats proposed to exclude black people, while unrestricted suffrage was defeated by a vote of 34 to 31. The final proposition allowed black people to vote and disqualified only those classes mentioned in the 14th Amendment. This finally passed by a vote of 30 to 26. The whole fight on suffrage was not a fight against black suffrage, but a question as to how far former Confederates were to be allowed to vote. The measures finally passed amid the great mass of these. Hamilton, the measure finally passed. Hamilton, the former provisional governor, secured the final triumph of a policy of leniency towards the ex-Confederates. So they're worried about the Confederates more than they're worried about black suffrage. This divided the Republicans into two factions. One which wished to disqualify the Confederates more completely, and the other which was willing to share the practical control of the Confederates. 3 black members, Ruby, Williams, and Newcomb, revolted against the prolonging of the session of the convention and resigned, declaring that the convention was prolonged for the purpose of subsidizing a venal press. Ruby declared that the present Reconstruction Convention has lost through many of its members all regard for dignity and honor as a legislative assembly, and that its continued assemblage will only terminate in the disgust of the entire country. The convention never actually adjourned, nor was the Constitution ever adopted by actual vote. The most, ooh, I don't know this word, meritist? Maybe it's meritorist. Meritorist, I'm going to guess. Meritorist, maybe. MERITOR. There it is. There it is.
Meritorious.
Meritorious, a formal adjective used to describe action, works, or behavior that deserves praise, honor, or reward due to their high quality, nobility, and value. Meritorious.
Meritorious.
Yeah, meritorious features of the constitutions were the abolition of slavery, and the liberal provision for the schools. The Constitution established free public schools and decreed that the receipts from public land should go to the school fund, besides other revenues. A state superintendent of public instruction was appointed. As a final result, Davis became the leader of the Radical Republican Party, while Hamilton was the leader of the Conservatives and was backed by Johnson. The result was a contest in which Hamilton could only hope to win by getting a large number of white Democrat votes, while Davis sought the bulk of the black vote. Because of their fear of disenfranchisement at the hands of the ex-Confederates, the election took place in 1869. It was quiet, although there was accusations of fraud in various parts of the state. E.G. Davis, by the efforts of Ruby, who marshaled the black votes, was elected governor by a small plurality. In the ensuing legislature, the 14th and 15th Amendments were adopted almost without opposition. And March 30th, 1870, the representatives of Texas were admitted to Congress. Thereupon, E.G. Davis became governor instead of provisional governor. In April, Governor Davis complained of the continuance of lawlessness in many parts of the state. Ruby, a person of color leader, was still active in Galveston, working for a new charter for the city. Every effort was made to aid the railroads by renewing land grants and making appropriations of $16,000 in state bonds for every mile built. Davis favored the railroads, but opposed, subsidized, and vetoed some of the bills. He kept on declaring that the slow civil war was going on in Texas, and pressed for a state police force. Later, a railroad grab involving $6 million subsidy was passed through the legislature and indignantly vetoed by the governor. Quote, in the accounting up the charges against Davis administration, not a suspension can be rest against his financial honesty, of which this veto message as an enduring monument. There was a small increase of debt. When Davis came into office in 1870, the state was out of debt. And when he left office in 1874, the debt was $4,414,095. The rate of the state taxes had risen from 15 cents in 1860s to 2.17 and a half on $100 valuation of 1866, exclusive of about 60 cents in addition, which was interest in bonds donated to the railroads. They're just like soaking up the money through the railroads. They're like doing this whole like crap where they taking money for the railroads and like taking it from themselves. Kind of weird. In 1869, provision was made to give the public school funds. There have been an effectual effort to establish a free public school system in Texas in 1845. In 1869, provisions was made to give to the public school fund the proceeds of the sale of all public lands, which resulted in a magnificent endowment. The Constitution of 1869 authorized the legislature to divide the state into school districts and appoint school directors. Every effort was made to wreck the school system in order to exclude black people. But gradually it became solidly established. As the election of 1873 approached, there was great excitement. Davis's chief reliance was on the black vote. He strove especially to get out the black vote in the Black Belt counties, where it was largely suppressed. The whites were determined to drive him out. Oh, I gotta do a warning. Hey, I got a warning. Hello. It was the... Oh, a second. Why is this? Okay. It was the sense of revolution. There was no shadow of a doubt of fraud and intimidation at this election. Davis, black, they used the N words, but the color for black. Davis black people were in many communities ordered to keep away from the polling place. White men underage were voted. The total vote was surprisingly large, probably because it was fraudulent. Davis was defeated by a vote of 85,549 to 42,663. And the majority of the legislature were Democrats. The state Supreme Court held the election irregular because of the case of a single individual, and Governor Davis attempted to prolong his term. But this meant civil war. Black militia was on hand to prevent Democrats from taking possession of the Capitol, and open hostilities were imminent. Davis telegraphed Grant, but military aid was refused, and finally Davis retired. The problem of this frontier state were never reached its vital economic phases until long after Reconstruction. During this Reconstruction period, many black people held office. There was a lack of whites who could take the test or oaths, or who were willing to act as supervisors, registrars, and clerks. Black people were usually on these boards, and sometimes were appointed even when whites were available. They became indeed so outstanding as office holders for a while that the Houston Telegraph sounded a warning that unless full strength of the whites should be enlisted, there would be a large number of black office holders, and that they would try to take the land out of the hands of the present owners. There were black people in the state militia and on various police forces, and they formed a military guard when Davis was trying to keep the Democrats from taking forcible possession of the Capitol. In 1872, for the first time, black people voted for president. Norris Wright Cunning, a young man of color, born in 1846, became sergeant at arms in the Texas legislature and warmly attached to Governor Davis. In 1871, Cuney, C-U-N-E-Y, became one of the school directors of Galveston County. In 1872, he was inspector of customs for the state. Cuney ran for mayor of Galveston in 1875, and his successful Democratic opponent testified to Cuney's interest in sound policy and honest government. He continued for many years to be the incorruptible and intelligent leader of black people of Texas. The borderland between borderland between slavery and free labor included the District of Columbia, Delaware and Maryland, West Virginia, Kentucky and Tennessee, Missouri, and the indigenous territory. Was vitally affected by the abolition of slavery. Its history during and after the Civil War is not usually included in the Reconstruction, and yet it had an analogous problem arise from abolition and enfranchisement. Unfortunately, however, monographic material upon which the study of black people in these states might be based is lacked in many particulars. There is practically nothing about black people in Delaware and in indigenous territory, and in the case of other states, the problems are insistently conceived as being exclusively problems of the white population, so that the development of black people is followed with great difficulty. Here remains, therefore, a most interesting and neglected field of historical and economic exploration. The District of Columbia. The District of Columbia is a special interest because it is the seat of the United States government. The status of slavery, where it not only was of intrinsic importance, but the nation and the world actually saw slavery in Washington and judged the whole system largely from what they saw. At the beginning of the 19th century, there were 4,027 black people in the district. They increased to 10,425 in 1820 and 13,746 in 1850. At the beginning of the war, the black population stood at 14,316. Of this population, there were 783 free black people in 1800s, 6,152, or the majority of black population, in 1830, and 11,131 in 1860, when they largely outnumbered the 3,000 slaves. Immediately after the war, the black population greatly increased, reaching 43,404 in 1870 and 59,596 in 1880. During these years, however, the population of black people in the total Washington population did not vary greatly. It formed 1/3 in 1810 and 1/3 in 1880. It fell to its lowest point, 19%, in 1860, because of the prominence of the city, and the abolition campaign was early concentrated upon slavery in the district and gained partial triumph when the slave trade was abolished in 1850. In 1861, the bill of abolished slavery in the District of Columbia was introduced by the Senate by Senator Wilson, and after much opposition from the border states, it passed. And the Senate and the House in April 1862 was signed by President Lincoln, April 16th, and resulted of this law made Washington a mecca for free black people. And in a single decade, black population increased 200%. These black people had begun their own self-supported schools in 1807. Civil rights of black people in the district were fought for continuously by Charles Sumner. He secured the law of April 3rd, 1865, to make valid black testimony in the district courts. He fought segregation on the railroad and streetcar lines, and the law which prevented black people from carrying mail. On his motion, black people was admitted to practice before the Supreme Court. Oh my gosh. In 1865 and another in 1867. The right to serve as jurors was not conferred on black people until March 1869. After the abolishment of slavery in the District of Columbia, there came an agitation to give black people the right to vote. A large mass of meetings was held at the Asbury EME Church in 1865. The petition signed by black people who could read and write was sent to Congress, and after long debate, the postponement for a year, black people was finally enfranchised in December 1866, and the bill passed over a veto by President Johnson. In November 1876, there were 13,294 white voters and 6,648 black people in 1871. At the election of the delegates of Congress, 17,757 whites and 10,772 black people voted. The economic status of black people in the district was made very difficult during and after the war because of a large increase of a black population. Nevertheless, black people accumulated a good deal of property. When, for instance, it was charged in 1865 that they did not own $40,000 worth of property in the whole city. It was proven that in one square, their holdings aggregated $45,592. Yet there were poverty and suffering among black people. In 1867, it was estimated that of 32,000 black people in the district, one half were destitute. Congress appropriated $15,000 on March 16, 1867, to relieve the freemen. In February 1871, Jesus Christ, I swear to God, I swear every other one is a number or a year. An act of passing changed the government of the District of Columbia. The old charters and courts, which had been inherited by the Maryland government, was discarded, and a territorial form of government established, with a governor and a legislative assembly composed of the Council of House of Delegates. The governor and council were appointed by the president, and the House elected by the people. The powers were similar to those granted to new territories, including the right to borrow money, assess taxes, and carry on the government. Alexander R. Shepard, a personal friend of President Grant, he ran a plumbing business and was a native to the district. Grant appointed him governor. He changed Washington from a poorly paved, badly lighted, unattractive city into a model and beautiful capital. The work was done rapidly and was accompanied by all the current political jobbery. Under any circumstances, the transformation would have cost large sums of money, but with graft and misappropriations of fund, the district was plunged into a debt of many millions of dollars. After sharp agitation, the government was changed again. All the people disenfranchised, and the district put under the rule of the 3 commissioners. Naturally, it was in the southern states. The harm of dishonesty of the Shepard regime was charged by the person of color voters, while the beauty and accomplishment of the reborn city was put to the credit of white civilization. There was about as much sense in one charge as in the other. Disenfranchisement in the district came at the demand of overtaxed real estate and of reactionary property interests hidden behind the color bar. Maryland. Oh, hold on. We don't have much people. Not getting a lot of coins, my guys. Sorry. Maryland had, at the beginning of the 19th century, 1,200. Yeah, now they got it. Maryland had, at the beginning of the 19th century, 125,222 black people. This number increased gradually to 155,932 in 1830, decreased in 1840, rose in 1850 to 165,091, and in 1870 was estimated at 71,131. The free black people in this population numbered 19,587 at the beginning of the century, and increased rapidly and steadily to 83,942 in 1860. Thus, the black population in Maryland was almost evenly divided at the opening of the war between free black people and slaves. Maryland, along with Virginia and the border states, had some part in the business of raising slaves for sale further south, but not as large as part of these other states. On the whole, her black population was artisans, laborers, and servants, and the institution of slavery was insecure because of the ease of escape to the northern states. The black codes of Maryland forbade the immigration of free black people, although in 1862 the penalty for sale into slavery was abolished. In 1865, immigration was permitted. An assembly of 1867 repealed many parts of the Black Code, but among other things, did not allow women of color to be competent witnesses against their white fathers and her children. During the war, nothing was done to interfere with the institutions of slavery, but the Convention of 1864, charged with forming a new constitution, had a considerable number of delegates in favor of abolition. Finally, a clause of immediate abolishment of slavery was passed by a vote of 1-2. When the Constitution went before the people, it was accepted by a narrow margin. The Constitutional Convention was held in Annapolis in 1867, and another constitution adopted by an overwhelming popular vote. It did not declare that men were, quote, created equally free, and compensation for freed slaves was demanded. This represented, that men were created equally free. Okay. Oh no, it did not declare that men, okay, cool. This represented a reactionary movement as compared with the Constitution of 1864. During the campaign of the Unconstitutional Union Party in 1866, pledged itself against black suffrage, while the Republican Party convention in 1876, sorry everybody, had men of color among the 200 delegates from Baltimore and a large number from the counties. Men of clergy of color opened this convention. A veteran of color said that there was no need to tell people how to vote. We have not, he said, the ability among us to occupy high positions of honor. We are like a newborn baby, taking our first steps to political life and strengthening support by the Radical Party. Another prominent leader said, it is because we are a minority of the voting population of Maryland. That is, the necessity has been forced upon us of casting around to see, but by what means we can extricate ourselves from our present position. Another still, whenever we can get the suffrage for men of color, I am satisfied. There is no man that can never betray us again. End quote. The resolution of the convention called for the equality of all American citizens in all civil and public rights, and urged the Republican Party, as a last resort, should the coming conservative constitution not give partial suffrage, to appeal to the Congress for support. People of color delegates, a member of the Committee on Resolution, rejoiced to see the day of real political equality between whites and black people. Another said he was ready, said Simmons, of old to depart in peace, now that he had seen salvation. In 1866, Governor Swan, a man who wanted to arm his militia with federal artillery, addressed an open letter to the editors of the Baltimore American, in which he said, I am utterly opposed to universal black suffrage and an extreme radicalism in certain men in Congress and in our own state who have been striving to shape a platform of the Union Party in the interest of black suffrage. And I look upon black suffrage and the recognition of the power in Congress to control suffrage within the states as a virtual subordination of black people in the state of Maryland. I consider the issue upon this subject as well made in the fall election and most important that has ever been brought to the attention of the people of the state of Maryland. Governor Swan was answered in the editorial in the America a few days later, which read, at least 9/10 of the Union men in Maryland have taken positions with the Congress of the United States. The governor will find when too late that he will not be followed by a corporal guards of those who place him in his present position in the course he has taken, and that his future affiliation must be with the disloyal, whilst his antagonists will be the true and loyal men of Maryland. I'm sorry, everybody. We're not getting coins. We're not getting coins, everybody. I'm so sorry. We're not getting coins, everybody. Notwithstanding the efforts of the Republicans The conservative constitution with black suffrage was adopted a few months later. Black people did not get the right to vote until after the 14th and 15th Amendments. Few men of color had been nominated to elective office in Maryland. In 1872, a black person ran for Congress in the 5th District, but withdrew in favor of a white candidate. Black labor had a large chance in Baltimore because of skilled work by black people in brick making, oyster shucking, work as stevedores, and they practically had a monopoly on ship caulking. After the Civil War, there came a good deal of competition with foreign labor. For the testimony of many persons of color, people of Baltimore appeared to have been actively engaged in all manner of businesses, ventures even before the Civil War. This antebellum enterprises were carried on generally by individual ownerships. By immediately after the Civil War, numerous cooperative movements sprang up among the people all over the city. Cooperative grocery stores, coal yards, beneficial societies, and other kinds of businesses met with marked success for short periods, but each one in its turn finally failed, owing either to lack of capital or trained business management, or both. Prior to the war, people of color of Baltimore had no place aside from the churches in which to hold public entertainments. To meet this need, several men of color, John H. Butler, Simon Smith, and Walter Sorrell, formed a partnership and purchased in 1863 a large 3-story brick building in Lexington Street near North, and had it converted into a hall. They named it Douglas Institution after the grand old man from Maryland. Besides public entertainments of all sorts, the hall was used as a meeting place for fraternal orders. Hold on a second, I gotta put something on. Ooh, cold. Hold on, everybody. Just putting on a hoodie. Oh, so Maryland's having problems too. These reconstructions, man, they just can't get it right. Cannot get it right. Oh, kind of annoying. It's like every time they come up with something or something sounds good, it gets vetoed or it gets delayed or something. It's just like, it's bureaucracy, man. The Chesapeake Marin Railroad, a dry dock company, a company owned and controlled by men of color, was organized in the year 1865. The company was capitalized at $40,000. The stock was divided into 8,000 shares at $5 a share. The corporation lived for a period of 18 years, or from 1865 to 1883, and was for many years very successful. It finally gave up business in 1883. The organization of the ship company saved the people of color chuckers, CAULKERS, for they became members of the White Caulkers Union. The failure of the whites to drive out people of color caulkers lessened their efforts to drive black people of color labor out of other fields, changing economic conditions, ending this company. But it was an object lesson to the whites as well as to black people of the power and capability of people of color in their industrial development. Before 1865, the public schools depended on local authorities. Then an educational revolution took place, and the state began to control the schools. The law of 1865 provided that the part of the school taxes paid by men of color should be used for black schools. The law of 1868 ordered a 10-cent tax on $100 for state schools. This was all the people of color schools could expect down to 1872, except by donations from philanthropists. In 1872, the state appropriated $50,000 for people of color schools, in addition to the color tax, but the white schools received all the regular school tax. In 1878, the sum of $100,000 was appropriated to be taken from the state school fund at the expense of the white schools. This remained the law until 1888. Baltimore had before the war at least 6 private schools taught by people of color, and later Northern philanthropists found schools for the free men. Kentucky was a state. Okay, we're going to Kentucky, it looks like. Kentucky was a state with 41,082 black people. At the beginning of the century, 170,000, 170, 170, 170,000, 130,000 in 1830, and 226,167, finally said it right, in 1860s. Black people formed a little over 1/3 of the population. There were comparatively few free black people, the number being only 10,684 in 1860. Kentucky was situated between the two sections that it was in the main current of the trade movement. Not only was it vital interest in the slave trade to the South, but also in the trade of foodstuff and manufacturing materials from the North. The economic problem, therefore, for Kentucky during the Civil War was difficult. Her chief interest was to keep the section from falling apart. Those spoiled her favorite economic positions. Then, too, she had several important crops, chief of which was tobacco. Next, corn. Besides, there were hemp, flax, and livestock. In all these economic industrial activities, black people figured largely. On the other hand, Kentucky was near the border, and the loss of capital through runaway slaves was a constant menace to the system. No sooner did the war open than this menace was increased by the action of the slave owners themselves. This practice of putting slaves to work on military projects was first begun with the slaves of the Southern sympathizers. A network of wagon roads had to be constructed over which military supplies should go. Fortification had to be built. Large numbers of slaves were early set to work on a road from central Kentucky to Cumberland Gap. And by the middle of 1863, Boyle was called for 6,000 slaves to extend the railroad from Lebanon to Danville. In 1863, there was a rumor that the slaves would rise in insurrection at Christmas time, and that Northern troops would aid them. This was followed by the policy of enlisting people of color troops into the Northern armies. The enlistment of slaves ended the slave system, and cash bounty and offer of freedom brought droves of black volunteers. Black people deserted the fields in the midst of growing crops in many parts of the state, and in western Kentucky, where they were under control, steamboats threatened the river, and with squads of troops raiding the plantations and forcibly took hundreds of black people from the field. In Madison County, black regiments were used to scorn the field and force the slaves into the army. 10,000 slaves left the state during the year 1863. Slaves enlisted at the rate of 100 a day, and after the war were freed at the rate of 500 a day. Still in Kentucky. Still, the legislature refused to ratify the 13th Amendment. Kentucky regarded the Emancipation Proclamation issued January 1st, 1863, as an unwise, unconstitutional void. Legislation was passed to nullify its execution, and in 1864, slaves were still being sold for $350 to $500 apiece. The Freedmen's Bureau set up the first state organization for black people at a convention held in Lexington, March 22nd through the 23rd, 1866. It was bitterly opposed because of its attempt to secure men of color justice in the court. General Fisk announced that Freemen's Court would be established for the protection of black people. And in the following months, these courts found much to do. This activity scared the legislator into granting black people partial civil rights and abolishing the slave code. During 1867, the Bureau arrested 89 persons charged with crimes against black people and handed them over to the federal court for trial. The legislators stubbornly refused to ratify the 13th Amendment, and after it had been ratified, Kentucky passed the Civil Rights Act, February 1866, which repealed the old slave code. The bill was passed as the result of a refusal on the part of Congress to remove the Freedmen's Bureau from the state until black people had been granted civil rights. The freedmen's were given all the civil rights enjoyed by white persons, with the exception of sitting on juries and testifying against whites. White labor rivalry was widespread. Guerrilla bands spread all over the state following the war. On March 1865, a band of men stopped a train on the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad by tearing up the tracks north of Ohio River, securing $30,000 in United States bonds, robbed the passengers, and fled across into Boone County. A similar crime was committed in 1867 in Simpson County. Some of the members of this gang were arrested. Some of the names of these gangs assumed were Regulators, Renew Band, and Sags Men. In Mason County, which the Regulators terrorized for 3 or 5 years, and wealthy farmers, was hanged. In Mercer County, one was shot and then hanged. Another 70-year-old was killed. God, keep burping. And later, 2 cousins were hanged. In Western Kentucky, black people were warned to leave the county, and landowners threatened with having their homes burned if they rented to them. In the election of 1864, the 2 parties were the conservatives and the radicals. The radical party was the champion of the rights of black people. A great storm of complaint came from the conservatives. Quote, the military authorities had acted outrageously. They had assumed control of the election as if it were wholly an affair of the army, and had assumed to decide who would vote and who should not. Soldiers were stationed around the polls, and at many places there were black people holding lists on names of people whom some radicals thought should not vote. None of these were permitted to approach the ballot box. All were simply people who were opposed to the 13th Amendment. In the meantime, black people began their political organization, and on Emancipation Day and on the 4th of July held celebrations with parades. The celebration of July 4th, 1868 was attended by 15,000 black people from Fayette, and surrounding counties. Radicals estimated that there would be over 50,000 black votes, and that only through these votes could they overcome the conservatives. The proposal 14th and 15th Amendment encouraged the radicals to anticipate victory by organized black voters. It was predicted that there would be 100,000 black votes, and Louisville Commercial declared that election thereafter would not be the one-sided affair. In 1876, in 1869, 68, and 1869, picnics and celebrations were held on the passage of the 15th Amendment, where black people gathered in great numbers, and where the radicals used their full opportunities to make speeches and to organize the control of new voters. One of the celebrations was held in Paris, Kentucky, and was attended by more than 6,000 black people. The most ambitious move to organize black people was made in the Convention of Frankfort in February 1870, where black people from almost every county in the state gathered together. This, quote, Republican Convention of citizens of color of the state of Kentucky was refused the legislative halls, but it seemed to have lost no prestige by meeting elsewhere, for one of its members boldly declared, quote, "The eye of the world is upon Major Hall." There were where they finally met. The planters and capitalists made a counter stoke by starting a noisy agitation of Chinese and other foreign laborers. Many black people were alarmed, partly as an answer to this, and for other purposes. Black convention was held in Louisville, Kentucky, on July 18th, 1869. There were 250 delegates in attendance. The subjects discussed were political and economic, as well as educational. They included the abolition of the relic of slavery, equal education, the rights in court, equal taxation, and ratification of the 15th Amendment, and the purchase of real estate. Black people advised the young men and young of Kentucky to, quote, learn trades and engage in agriculture pursuits as a proper mode of supporting themselves and giving encouragement to mechanics and agriculture, and by all means to produce homes for themselves and families. In Fayette County, a meeting of black people was held in which they expressed their willingness to work and enter into labor contracts with whites. An intelligence office of an ex-soldier maintained a labor agency. During the first half of 1869, 3,000 black people were supplied with jobs through them. On August 20th, 1869, black people observed the day of Thanksgiving for their success. Evidently, the whites were praised for their cooperation. They contributed ham, beef, flour, and other provisions for the celebration. The first test of black suffrage came in 1870, when county offices were to be filled. The Democrats attempted to arouse black people to demand offices so that the radicals would be estranged. The Democrats did not intend to invite black support, and they, quote, early saw that it would be dangerous to interpose violent opposition to black voting. What then should be their position towards inviting his supporter? Henry Watterson believed that black suffrage would be accepted as an established fact, that black voters should be welcome as much as others. But the whole ideal of black suffrage was so fearful and repulsive to the Democrats that they plead with the reasonable radicals, quote, as sensible men, to halt and think seriously for at least 1 minute. They sought to drive out of the party many radicals by holding up to them the specter of black officials. In fact, they pushed the logic with great emphasis on every occasion that if the radicals embrace black people, they must give them offices. They hoped to arouse black people on this point to demand offices and thereby apparel his relationship with his allies. Cheating and fraud was eventually restored too. Many black people were prevented from voting by requiring receipts for taxes, which had been assessed on them. There were insufficient faculties for voting purposely, leaving black people waiting until the sun went down. An endless number of irrelevant questions were asked, requiring in one place for 20 to 25 minutes for the number 4 black people to vote, while 10 to 15 whites could vote during that time. The question of offices became increasingly important for black people. It was not merely a matter of personal ambition, but here, as in the Deep South, a question of administration of the law which they with perfect right feared to trust entirely to the hands of whites. In 1873, a black convention declared that since they had voted for the radicals, they should now have, quote, a reasonable portion of the offices, and if And if claims were to be ignored, they could, quote, cease to be indebted to this party any more than to any other. In 1876, black people owed $1 million of taxable property on which they paid a tax of $3,666. Most of this wealth consisted in land which they greatly coveted. By 1871, black agricultural fairs were held in many of the counties. The freedmen were encouraged by bureau agents and by other people to be frugal and began to save money. The branches of freedmen saving and trust companies located in Louisville and Lexington contained $171,000 in saving belonging to black people when the crash came. The economic rebirth of the state went on with black help. The number of farms increased in this decade, 1860 to 1870, from 90,000 to 118,000. The last year of the war, 1864 to 1865, tobacco dropped from 127 million pounds to 54 million. Wheat from 1 million bushels to 3 million. Hemp from 10 million pounds to 2 million. Hay from 135,000 tons to 127,000. Barley from 161,000 bushels to 137 bushels. Corn increased from 39 million bushels to 58 million. And an increase of crops began in 1867 and attained a pre-war mark by 1871. A comparison of the produce of these 2 years shows an increase in tobacco from 54 million to 103 million pounds, hay from 127,000 to 320,000 tons, barley from 161,000 to 243,000 bushels. Corn fell from 58 million to 54 million bushels. Tennessee, all right, I think we're on Tennessee, it looks like. Tennessee was a border state, which formed in many respects, an economic complement to Kentucky. The state had, at the beginning of the century, 3,778 black people. They increased rapidly to 147,158 in 1830, chiefly through the development of the cotton belt in the western parts of the state near the Mississippi. At the opening of the war, Tennessee had 283,019 black people, and the number of free black people was small, being only 7,300 in 1860. During the decades of 1850 to 1860, Shelby County, of which Memphis was the center, gained its great mass of black population. From this point, the Cotton Kingdom spread west and south. A strong contrast to this in Nashville and in the middle and eastern part of the state. In a similar part of Kentucky, there was strong emancipation sentiments in earlier times, chiefly with the motive of getting rid of the competition of black labor. This was manifested by the opposition to the custom of slaves, hiring out at times, which was prevalent in this part of the state. In the Constitutional Convention of 1796, I'm so used to saying 18. There was an attempt to prohibit slavery after 1864, which did not pass, but free black people who met the requirements of residence and landholding were allowed to vote. They enjoyed this right until 1834. At the Convention of 1834, another attempt to abolish slavery was defeated, and the vote was denied free black people, with some exceptions. The slave trade in Tennessee was even more lucrative than in Kentucky, and there was strong trade of both slaves and material down to Mississippi to New Orleans. The Confederates seized most of Tennessee at the beginning of the war, but with the retreat of the Confederate Army after the surrender of Fort Donelson in 1862, a territory of 30,000 square miles was open to federal occupation, and a population of 1 million souls was left without government and in possible danger of a slave insurrection. To meet the emergency, President Lincoln, March 3rd, appointed Senator Andrew Johnson, a former governor of Tennessee, military governor with the rank of brigadier general. In 1863, Rosecrans needed every available man for the winter campaign. Lincoln telegraphs September 8th and urged all Union officers to get every man he could, black and white, to guard the roads and bridges and send all the better trained soldiers forward to Rosecrans. On October 21st, Johnson and Stearns of Massachusetts were authorized to raise troops in Tennessee. 6 regular black regiments and 2 garrisons of hospital regiments were thus raised. Ooh, we're getting there. Governor Johnson made attempts immediately and at several times thereafter to reorganize a civil government of the state. But all these attempts failed until the people of East Tennessee undertook the task of the summer of 1864. In November 1864, the East Tennessee Union Executives Committee called a convention to meet in Nashville in December. Meantime, the Confederate captured Knoxville, and when it was time for the convention to meet, Hood was threatening Nashville, and the convention was therefore postponed until January 8th, 1865. By that time, the Confederates had been driven out. Johnson had been elected vice president, and Congress had refused to count Tennessee's scattering presidential vote. The convention met and voted for amendments of the Constitution. 1, abolishing slavery. 2, providing that all citizens who had borne arms for the United States should be allowed to vote. Color should not be disenfranchised. Any persons who was a competent witness in the courts. Right? Yeah, I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to put a little bit of a thing here to look ahead. So we're looking at 628. Looking ahead, real quick. Oh my gosh, it's a long chapter. Oh, no, it's okay. I think, okay, 628. I think we can hit the end of this chapter. Okay, sweet. I think we can make it to the end of the chapter. We might go a little over. United States should be allowed to vote. Color should be not be disenfranchised. Persons who, okay, God. Johnson, wait, what was I on? 28. Okay, yeah, okay, go. Johnson favored the amendments, and they were put together with slight modifications. This is the story of Winston, but by consulting Hall, one learns that the slight modification was the dropping of the amendment which allowed black people to vote. The report finally adopted by the convention proposed 2 amendments to the state constitution, one to abolish slavery and another to forbidding the legislator to make any law recognizing it. The report directed that all who voted should take the ironclad oath, and that the convention should nominate a candidate for governor and a complete legislative ticket. In the ensuing election, 20% of the vote in 1860 was cast. William G. Brownlow was chosen governor by 32,352 votes against 35 scattering ones. 4 days after his inauguration, Lee surrendered and the new government was safe. The Constitutional Convention had declared in favor of disenfranchising all who had fought against the United States. Governor Brownlow was determined to make this declaration into a law. After recommending the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the federal Constitution, he remained the legislator that the loyal people who had entrusted the qualification of voters for them wanted them to act decisively in the matter. He asked the legislator for military force to enforce the law when enacted. The law provided that white persons of lawful age and residence who had entertained unconditional Union sentiments from the outbreak of the war and who had arrived at the age of 21 years since November 4th, 1865, or who could prove their loyalty or had been honorably discharged from the Union Army, and where Union men conscripted into the Confederate Army or had voted at the election of 1864 to 1865 should be entitled to the privileges of elective franchise. The next session of the legislature, the government recommended the amendment of the franchise bill and the colonization of black people in Texas or Mexico, or their admission to full citizenship and suffrage. And in the case, the franchise law restricted the vote of former Confederates should be repealed. The result was that the bill, which the first legislature had refused to consider, became the law on January 21st, 1866. This said, the persons of Africa and indigenous descent are hereby declared to be complete witnesses in all the courts of the state, in as full a manner as such persons are by the act of Congress competent witnesses in all the courts of the United States, in all laws and parts of the laws of the state, including such persons for competency, are thereby repealed, providing, however, that this act shall not be so construed as to give persons of color the right to vote, hold office, or sit in juries in the state, and that this provision is inserted by virtue of the provisions of the 9th section of the amended Constitution ratified February 22nd, 1865. Race prejudice was strong in East Tennessee based on the economic rivalry of black people and poor whites. East Tennesseans, though opposed to slavery and secession, do not like N-words. There is at this day more prejudice against people of color among the middle and poor classes, the Union men of the South who owned few or no slaves, than among the planters who owned them by scores and hundreds. On the other hand, the planters had not surrendered their ideas on slavery. The design of the Great Secession majority of Tennessee may have been changed by the events of the war, and so many have been their opinions in their own strength and of the strength of the government. But unless your memorialists greatly misunderstand them, their sentiments, sympathies, and passion remain unchanged. They welcome peace because they are disabled from making war. They submit because they can no longer resist. They accept results they cannot reject, and profess loyalty because they have a halter around their neck. They recognize the abolition of slavery because they see it before them as a fact. But they say it was accomplished by gross violations of the Constitution, that black people is free only in the fact that, but not in law or of right. The attitude of the state towards black people was bad. The prominent, and this is the state, I think. Yeah, no worries. I'm almost done. The prominent feelings of those lately in rebellion is that the deep state hatred, amounting in many cases of the spirit of revenge towards the white unionist of the state, and the haughty contempt for the black people whom they cannot treat as free men. The hatred for the white loyalists is intensifying by the accusation that has deserted the South in her extremity, and is therefore a traitor, and by the setting up of a government of the minority. The spirit of revenge is called forth by the attempts of disenfranchising them and by the retaliatory acts of the returned Union soldiers for wrongdoings, for wrongs done by them during the war. Black people is I don't know how to say that, I'm not going to say that, who constantly reminds them of the defeat and of what they call, quote, a, quote, just but lost cause. And the sight of him in the enjoyment of freedom is a constant source of irritation. Oh, poor white people, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. On the 1st of May, 1866, a riot broke out in Memphis between the whites and black people, which continued to 2 days and resulted in the death of 24 black people and the wounding of one white man. As a result of this, the legislature passed the Metropolitan Police Bill, May 14th, which provided that police regulation of the city of Memphis should be in the hands of 3 commissioners appointed by the government, and made it a crime for anyone else to attempt to exercise any control in the city not subordinate to this board. The provision of this act were also attended to Nashville and Chattanooga. Black people in Tennessee were not content. On Friday, June 23rd, 1865, they sent out notice of the state convention in August. Great efforts are being made to oppress. And in our judgment in relations to the House Bill number 47, the re-enslave us. Let us lay our grievances before the general government, under the government of the noblest patriots of the country, Andrew Johnson, a friend of humanity and liberty. We feel assured that our cause will succeed. We enter anew upon our duties as men trusted in God. Come on, come all, rally to the cause of liberty and to the rescue. The convention was in session 4 days and resolved that we protest against the congressional delegations of from Tennessee being received into the Congress of the United States. If the legislature of Tennessee does not grant the petition before it's prior to December 1st, 1865. The months before the opening of Congress in December 1865, the clerk of the House announced his decision not to put on the official roll the names of any men claiming to be elected from the southern state. This decision of the clerk was endorsed by the Republican caucus, held at the opening of the session. Congress assembled at noon, December 4th, and when the clerk, in calling the roll, reached Indiana, Mr. Maynard from the first district of Tennessee rose and attempted to speak, but the clerk would allow no interruptions of the roll. A report of the Joint Committee on Reconstruction, March 5th, 1866, proposed to the following the admission of Tennessee with white suffrage, but it was recommitted. July 20th, it reappeared and was amended by the Senate so as to require acceptance for the 14th Amendment. In this form, the resolution was passed July 23rd, and it was approved July 24th. Although the president denied that Congress had any right to pass laws preliminary to the admission of qualifying representatives from any of the states and object to certain words in the preamble, Tennessee complied by promptly accepting the 14th Amendment, July 12th, 11th through the 12th, 1866, the vote being 15-6 in the Senate and 43-11 in the House. Subsequently, February 6, 1867, the House of Representatives of Tennessee, I almost want to say Tallahassee every time, passed a bill striking the word white from the franchise law of the state by the vote of 38-25. The Senate concurred February 18th by a vote of 14-7. And in March, the Supreme Court of the state upheld the constitutionality of black suffrage. The Republican platform in February 1867 severely attacked Andrew Johnson as an unprincipled adopted son, but said nothing directly about black people. The conservative platform of April 17th said that our fellow citizens of color, being now citizens of the United States and citizens of the state of Tennessee and voters of the state, are entitled to all rights and privileges of citizens under the laws and Constitution of the United States and the state of Tennessee. In a race for Congress, in 1872, Johnson made a bid for the black vote. In Western counties, crowds of black people attended the speaking, some evidently anxious to make good citizens. Addressed these people of color, Andrew Johnson explained his position, quote, if I fit and qualified by character and education, no one should deny you the ballot, he said. I have been ridiculed for saying I would not be your Moses, he continued. Yet I say again, I will be your Moses. And if you have a certificate to vote, you should be allowed to vote. Great. So basically, I'm your prophet. What a fucking bastard. I'll give you a vote, sure. Missouri, there were two or three black people in the Tennessee legislature during the Reconstruction, while others served as state and city officers. Nashville, at the time, had a third of its city council composed of black people. Missouri was a western state, which became southern because it was one of the great national highways in the south, to the south, and its political weight was needed by the southern oligarchy. It was thought that if Missouri remained a slave state, Kansas, Colorado, and California would follow, and the Southern Empire would be safe. But Missouri was lost. Slavery would be restricted with its whole western independence on Texas. Missouri had few black people, 3,618 at her first census, 49,814 in 1840, and 118,503, about a tenth of her population in 1860. Only 3,572 of them were free. Most slaveholding families had only 3 to 4 black people. Slavery was not a system. It was a survival, a sentiment, and a matter of common labor and service. This made a sharp economic division on the outbreak of the war between those who said slavery was industrially useless in Missouri, but that the South had a right to it, and those who cared neither for slavery nor for the South. There arose a bitter internecine strife, family against family and neighbor against neighbor. To the Union went 109,000 troops. To the Confederate 30,000. There were 244 battles and 2,261 engagements in the state, which devastated the land and killed over 30,000 people. Railroaded thousands of settlers and spread robbery and crime, lying and murder, mistreatment of women and children, disease and death. The legislature of 1860 favored the South, but no succession. The new Governor Jackson, who sought to force the state into secession, was opposed by F.P. Blair, a leader of the new industrial development. The Civil War came, and Blair was victorious. The Constitutional Convention in 1865 abolished slavery without compensation. The convention, which emancipated black people, drew up a new constitution, which provided for the establishment of the maintenance of a free public school for instruction for all persons in the state who were between the ages of 5 and 21. Later, the legislature passed a law requiring one or more segregated schools to be set up in the cities and villages. This law, like many other laws related to black people, was overlooked. During the period, however, there was a growing sentiment in favor of public schools. The school system grew. Black troops found the first school of black hiring training at Jefferson City, Lincoln Institution. Radicals carried an election of 1866 to 1868, but nevertheless, the state constitutional amendment enfranchising black people in Missouri was defeated. The amendment was submitted by the legislature, but was lost by more than 19,000 votes. The opposition came from the Democrats, who voted solidly against it, and from a goodly number of radicals. Also, the question of enfranchising black people had been an important issue in the state ever since they had been freed in 1865. But it was submitted to the people in the form of a constitutional amendment. But once the 15th Amendment of the United States conferred suffrage upon black people, was ratified and put into force before the amendment to the Constitution of Missouri could be brought up again. This settled the issue without any further contest in the state. Here then, in this stretch of the part which black people took in the Reconstruction in various southern states, together with some indications of their action along the border. It is incomplete, and for that reason, inconclusive. And yet, no one could read these records and the documents upon which they are based without concluding that this was a perfectly normal development. That these black men were ordinary men who, according to their training and experience, and particularly according to their economic conditions, did extraordinarily well and do not in the slightest degree deserve the contempt of unbridled abuse that has been put upon them. They were not primarily responsible for the exceeding waste and corruption in the South, and more than the laboring class was to blame for the greater waste and dishonesty in the North. They were not proven incapable of self-government. On the contrary, they took decisive and encouraging steps towards the widening and strengthening of human democracy. It is only the blind spot in the eyes of America and its historians, and can overlook and misread so clear the encouraging a chapter of human struggle and human pitfall. And here we go. Here's the thing. It's taking forever. In speed of day and haste the hour, break down the barriers, again the power, to use the land and sail the seas, to hold the tools unchecked and free, to tribute pay, by service give. Let each man work all may live. Banish all bonds and usury. Be free, be set free. Democracy. A.W. Thompson. And that is where we're going to end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so the tablet works. It's just the phone that won't work.
Okay. Sorry. So we're stopping here. All right. And we'll be the counter-revolution of property. And I have no idea what that's going to be about. But they can't get nothing passed, and they can't give black people the rights that they're due. That's just what it is. It's just incompetence. And just making like slavery just relevant still. It's just like our governments now. They just can't get shit done. What page? 637.
Can you still hear me? Yeah, you can
Yes.
still hear me. I'm still lighting up. Okay, so I can play on TikTok on my tablet. I can't play on TikTok on my phone, which doesn't do me any good because I've got to be able to read along. So, But thank you. At least now I know.
Okay. All right. Does anybody want? There's only two of us. Never mind. Well, I think I'm going to end it then.
Sounds good. I really enjoyed the reading. It was going into some states I'd never been into before. And when it edited me, because it wouldn't let me talk, I was trying to say, and remember, y'all, the breeding farms were going on in Tennessee and Kentucky at the time when they were saying that there certain slave counts. And that's all I was trying to say.
All right. Anybody else? Because it's just us two. No one likes to be here. It's probably a boring book to them. All right, then. Well, it's a little bit over, so I'll go ahead and close it down. We'll read it. We'll keep reading this. All right. I was wondering when Missouri came up, and yeah. All right, everybody. Well, wish you good night.